Chapter 5, Transcendence. The presence that identified itself as Ael'Thara filled the control chamber with a warmth that seemed to come from beyond the physical universe. Eve felt her consciousness expanding again, but this time not through technological interface, through direct contact with a being that had learned to exist as pure thought and intention. The Devourers, Ael'Thara continued, consume only that which exists in the lower dimensions of reality. They cannot touch what has ascended beyond the need for physical form. But the choice to ascend must be freely made, and it cannot be undone. Eve looked at SciFi, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his alien features. Around them, the Devourers continued to advance, but slowly, as if moving through some kind of resistance field generated by Ael'Thara's presence. What does ascension mean? Eve asked. What would happen to us? Your consciousness would be preserved, but transformed. You would exist as patterns of information encoded in the quantum substrate of reality itself. You would be immortal, omnipresent, and capable of experiencing existence in ways that physical beings cannot imagine. But, and here Ael'Thara's presence carried a note of sadness, you would no longer be human, SciFi would no longer be of his people. You would become something new, something that has never existed before. SciFi was considering the offer, his bioluminescent patterns shifting through complex sequences that suggested deep internal conflict. The alternative is to be consumed by the Devourers. At least through ascension, some part of us would continue to exist. But what about my people? Eve asked. What about Earth? If I ascend, I can never return, never warn them about the Devourers. That is not entirely true, Ael'Thara replied. Ascended beings can influence physical reality, though indirectly. You could guide your species, protect them from threats they do not yet comprehend. But you could never again walk among them as one of them. The Devourers were almost upon them now, their entropy fields beginning to affect the crystalline structure of the chamber walls. Time was running out. Choose quickly, Ael'Thara urged. I can maintain this protective field for only a few more moments. Eve felt the weight of the decision crushing down upon her. To remain human and die, or to become something unimaginably different and live forever. To return to Earth with warnings of the coming threat, or to watch over humanity from a realm beyond physical existence. There has to be another way, she said desperately. Some option we haven't considered. There's one possibility, SciFi said suddenly. The dimensional gateways I mentioned. If we could activate one of them, we might be able to escape to a dimension the Devourers cannot reach, at least temporarily. The gateways were experimental, Ael'Thara warned. Many of them lead to realms that are hostile to physical life. Others connect to dimensions where the laws of physics are so different that your bodies would be destroyed instantly. But some of them are safe. Some lead to parallel versions of this reality, worlds similar to your own where the Devourers have not yet arrived. It would be a gamble, but one with better odds than remaining here. Eve made her decision. Show me the gateways. Through the facility's sensor network, Ael'Thara highlighted three-dimensional laboratories that still retained power. Each contained a gateway device, though their destinations were unknown. The first leads to a reality where this solar system never developed intelligent life. The second connects to a dimension where time flows backward. The third. Ael'Thara paused. The third is locked onto coordinates I do not recognize. It may lead anywhere, or nowhere. I'll take the unknown over certain death, Eve said. SciFi? I will accompany you. My people's knowledge may be useful wherever we end up. Then go quickly, Ael'Thara said. I will maintain the protective field until you reach the gateway, but no longer. The effort required is significant. Eve helped SciFi to his feet, noting that the alien's condition had worsened during their conversation. The biofoam repairs were almost completely broken down now, and his bioluminescent patterns were growing dimmer. They left the control chamber through a service corridor that led directly to the dimensional laboratories. Behind them, Eve could hear the sounds of the Devourer's assault intensifying as Ael'Thara's protective field began to weaken. The third laboratory was a circular chamber containing a device that looked like a metallic ring suspended vertically in a framework of crystalline supports. The ring itself was perhaps 3 meters in diameter, large enough for both of them to pass through together. The activation sequence, SciFi said, moving to a control console near the device. It requires quantum resonance patterns that I may be too weak to generate. What do you need me to do? Place your hands on the primary interface nodes. The gateway requires organic consciousness to lock onto dimensional coordinates. I will provide the technical expertise, but you must provide the intention, the will to travel to wherever this portal leads. Eve positioned herself at the interface while SciFi began the activation sequence. The ring began to glow with internal light, and the space within its circumference started to shimmer like water disturbed by wind. Concentrate on your desire to escape this place, SciFi instructed. But do not try to control the destination. The gateway will find a reality compatible with our life patterns. The portal was stabilizing, showing glimpses of what lay beyond: alien skies, unfamiliar constellations, landscapes that might or might not be habitable. Eve focused her will on the simple desire to survive, to find a place where they could rest and heal and plan their next move. Behind them, the laboratory's entrance exploded inward as the first devourers breached Ael'Thara's weakening defenses. The creatures flowed into the chamber like living darkness, their entropy fields immediately beginning to corrupt the crystalline structure around them. Now! SciFi shouted, both mentally and aloud. Jump now! Eve grabbed the wounded alien and leaped through the portal just as the gateway's power systems began to fail. The last thing she saw of Veltar was Ael'Thara's presence blazing like a miniature star as the ancient being made one final effort to prevent the devourers from following them through the dimensional rift. Then everything dissolved into chaos. Chapter 6, New Horizons. Consciousness returned slowly, accompanied by the sound of wind through unfamiliar vegetation and the warmth of a yellow sun on her face. Eve opened her eyes to find herself lying in what appeared to be a meadow filled with flowers that moved independently of the breeze, their petals shifting through a spectrum of colors that didn't exist in terrestrial botany. She sat up carefully, checking herself for injuries from the dimensional transit. Her environmental suit had protected her from the worst effects, though she felt disoriented and nauseous, side effects of interdimensional travel that SciFi had warned her about. SciFi, she called, looking around the meadow. Are you here? A weak mental response came from somewhere nearby. Here, Eve. I am, damaged but functional. She found him collapsed beneath what appeared to be a tree, though this plant had crystalline bark that rang like bells when the wind touched it. The alien's condition had deteriorated significantly during the transit, his bioluminescent patterns were barely visible, and the silvery fluid that served as his blood was seeping from multiple locations. The biofoam isn't working anymore, she observed, kneeling beside him to examine his injuries. The dimensional transit disrupted its molecular cohesion. My physiology is incompatible with this reality's quantum parameters. I am slowly dissolving at the cellular level. Eve felt a chill of panic. After everything they had been through together, was she about to lose her only companion in this strange new dimension? There has to be something we can do. Some way to stabilize your condition. Perhaps. If this reality contains certain elements common to most dimensions, I might be able to synthesize a temporary stabilization compound. But I would need access to specific materials, crystalline matrices similar to those we left behind. Eve looked around the alien landscape, noting the variety of unusual geological formations visible in the distance. Some of them did appear to be crystalline in nature, though whether they would be compatible with SciFi's needs remained to be seen. Can you travel? We need to find shelter and resources. For a short distance, yes. But my condition will continue to deteriorate. We have perhaps 6 of your hours before the cellular breakdown becomes irreversible. Eve helped him to his feet, and together they began exploring their new environment. The meadow they had arrived in was part of a larger plain that stretched to the horizon in several directions. But to the north, she could see what appeared to be a forest of the crystal trees, and beyond that, mountains that gleamed with mineral formations. Her scanner was having difficulty adapting to this dimension's physics, but it was detecting multiple energy sources that might indicate civilization. Or at least, something that generated power in organized patterns. "I'm reading artificial energy signatures," she reported. "About 15 kilometers to the northwest. Could be a settlement. Or it could be something hostile. We know nothing about this reality's inhabitants. We don't have much choice. You need help, and I need to find out where we are and how to get home." They began walking toward the energy signatures, following what appeared to be a path through the crystal forest. The trees were even more spectacular up close. Their bark contained what looked like frozen music, with harmonic patterns that created visual symphonies when viewed from different angles. "This is beautiful," Eve said, momentarily forgetting their dire circumstances. "It's like an entire forest of musical instruments." The trees are indeed musical. They generate harmonic resonances that help maintain this ecosystem's stability. This dimension appears to be one where sound and light interact in ways impossible in our home reality. As they walked, Eve began to notice other unusual features of this world. The grass beneath their feet grew in mathematical patterns, fractals that repeated at different scales throughout the landscape. The flowers in the distance moved in choreographed dances, as if responding to some cosmic rhythm only they could hear. But most striking were the insects, if they could be called insects. They appeared to be made of living light, their forms shifting and flowing as they moved through the air. Some resembled butterflies, others were more like hummingbirds, and a few defied any terrestrial comparison. "Light dancers," SciFi identified them. "I have read about creatures like these in the archives of dimensions where physics allows matter and energy to exist in hybrid states." One of the light dancers approached them, its form pulsing with curious patterns. It circled around Eve several times before settling on her outstretched hand, where it felt like warm electricity against her skin. "It's beautiful," she breathed, watching the creature's internal patterns shift and flow. "Almost like it's trying to communicate." "It is." The light dancers are a form of collective intelligence. Each individual is like a single neuron in a vast distributed consciousness. More light dancers began to gather around them, their combined radiance creating complex interference patterns in the air. Eve felt a strange tingling in her mind, not unlike the telepathic contact she had experienced with SciFi, but different. This felt more like music than language, patterns of meaning that bypassed conscious thought. "Welcome, travelers from beyond the harmonic barriers," the collective voice whispered in her thoughts. "We perceive your distress and offer assistance. You can help?" Eve asked aloud, unsure if the creatures could understand spoken language. "The damaged light bearer requires crystalline harmonics to restore cellular cohesion. Such harmonics exist within the singing city that lies ahead. But the journey is perilous for those who do not understand the deep music." "What is the deep music?" SciFi asked telepathically. "The fundamental frequency that underlies all reality in this dimension. Those who cannot hear it become lost in the spaces between notes, where existence becomes uncertain." Eve felt a chill at the implications. "Can you teach us to hear this music?" For the light bearer, yes, his neural architecture is compatible with harmonic perception. For the solid thought bearer, the creatures seemed to pause, considering. The process would be dangerous. Your consciousness might become permanently altered. What's the alternative? We can guide you through the resonance field safely, but the journey will take much time. Time the damaged light-bearer may not have. Eve looked at SciFi, seeing her own dilemma reflected in his alien features. Risk permanent alteration of her consciousness, or watch her companion die while they traveled slowly toward uncertain help. How dangerous is the alteration? She asked. Unknown. No solid thought-bearer has ever attempted harmonic integration in this dimension. You might gain new forms of perception and communication. You might lose the ability to exist in your home reality. You might simply cease to be. Before Eve could respond, SciFi made the decision for both of them. Do it. I will not allow fear of the unknown to prevent us from trying to survive. Very well. Prepare yourself, solid thought-bearer. The deep music begins now. The light dancers began to swirl around Eve in increasingly complex patterns, their combined radiance growing brighter with each rotation. She felt their influence penetrating her consciousness, teaching her neural pathways to recognize patterns of meaning that existed beyond the normal spectrum of human perception. At first, it was overwhelming, like trying to hear a symphony while standing inside a resonating bell. Every thought became amplified, every emotion translated into cascades of harmonic frequency. She could feel her sense of self beginning to dissolve into the greater music of existence. But gradually, training and determination won out over chaos. Eve began to understand the patterns, to recognize the deep music that the light dancers had spoken of. It was like learning a new language, but one that was felt rather than heard, experienced rather than understood. "Can you hear it now?" the collective asked. "Yes," Eve whispered, and was amazed to discover that her voice now carried harmonics it had never possessed before. She could hear the music in her own speech, see the patterns of meaning rippling through the air around her words. "Then we can travel quickly. Follow the resonance paths, and do not step into the spaces between." The journey to the singing city became a navigational challenge unlike anything Eve had ever experienced. The light dancers guided them along invisible paths that followed the natural harmonics of the landscape, avoiding areas where the music became discordant or simply ceased to exist. SciFi was weakening rapidly, his bioluminescent patterns now barely visible even in the dim light beneath the crystal trees. But he pressed on, supported by Eve's strength and driven by the hope of finding help in the mysterious city ahead. They crested a ridge and saw their destination, a settlement that seemed to be built from crystallized music itself. The buildings were shaped like frozen sound waves, their surfaces rippling with harmonic patterns that created a visual symphony of impossible beauty. "The singing city," Eve breathed, her enhanced perception allowing her to see the complex acoustic architecture that made such a place possible. "Now comes the true test," the light dancers warned. "The city's inhabitants are beings of pure harmony. They may view your dissonance as a threat to be eliminated." As they approached the city's outskirts, Eve could see its inhabitants, creatures that seemed to be made of crystallized song, their forms shifting and flowing with the complex musical patterns that filled the air. They were beautiful, but also alien in ways that made even SciFi seem familiar by comparison. One of the beings approached them, its form harmonizing with the background music to create patterns of welcome or warning, Eve couldn't be sure which. "Visitors from the silent dimensions," it sang, its voice like crystal bells in a gentle breeze. "You bring discord to our perfect harmony. State your purpose before we are forced to silence you permanently." Eve stepped forward, using her newly acquired harmonic perception to modulate her voice into patterns that wouldn't disrupt the local acoustic environment. "We are travelers seeking help for my injured companion. The light dancers said you might have the crystalline harmonics needed to heal him." The being's form shifted, analyzing the musical patterns in Eve's speech. "You have learned to sing in our frequencies, but you do not belong to the deep music." "How is this possible?" "The light dancers taught me. They said it was necessary to reach your city safely. The light dancers are wise, but impulsive. They do not always consider the consequences of their gifts." The being approached SciFi, studying his deteriorating condition with what appeared to be professional interest. "The damaged one carries resonances from many dimensions. His harmonics are complex. Can you help him?" Eve asked, modulating her thoughts into musical patterns. "Perhaps. But the process would require the consent of the Harmony Council, and they do not grant such permissions lightly. Your presence here disrupts the perfect acoustic balance we have maintained for eons." More crystal beings were gathering now, their combined voices creating a chord progression that was hauntingly beautiful but also somehow ominous. Eve realized they were debating, discussing the newcomers in musical patterns too complex for her to follow completely. The debate continued for several minutes before the original being turned back to them. "The council has reached a decision. We will attempt to heal your companion, but only if you agree to pay the required price." "What price?" Eve asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. "One of you must remain here permanently, to become part of our harmonic structure." Your unique resonances from other dimensions would add new complexity to our eternal song. Eve felt her heart sink. They had escaped the Devourers and survived dimensional transit, only to face another impossible choice. Save SciFi's life by sacrificing her freedom, or watch him die and continue their journey alone. But before she could respond, SciFi made the choice for both of them, again. "I will stay," he said, his mental voice carrying a note of finality. "My people have always valued sacrifice for the greater good. If my remaining here can save both our lives and contribute to something beautiful, then it is a fair trade." "No," Eve said firmly. "We find another solution." "There is no other solution," the crystal being sang sadly. "The healing process requires harmonic integration with our city's resonance field. Whoever undergoes the treatment will become permanently attuned to our frequencies. They cannot leave without causing catastrophic discord." Eve looked around the singing city, seeing it now not as a place of beauty but as a beautiful prison. The inhabitants were happy, certainly, but they were trapped by their own perfection, unable to leave their harmonic paradise without destroying it. "Give me a moment to think," she said. She walked a short distance away, her mind racing as she tried to find some alternative that didn't involve permanent separation or death. The light dancers had followed them to the city, and now they swirled around her in patterns of concern and encouragement. "There is another path," they whispered. "But it requires great courage and even greater trust." "Tell me." "The harmonic integration can be reversed, but only by someone who understands both the deep music and the silence between dimensions. You have learned our music. If you also learn the silence, you could free your companion after his healing is complete." "How do I learn the silence?" "By traveling to the spaces between harmonics, the places where music goes to die. It is a journey from which many never return, and those who do are changed." Eve considered the option. Another transformation, another risk of losing her humanity. But this time, it offered the possibility of saving SciFi without sacrificing either of their freedoms. How long would this take? Time moves differently in the silent spaces. For you, perhaps moments. For those who wait in the harmonic dimension, possibly days. Eve made her decision. "I'll do it." She returned to where SciFi waited with the crystal beings, his condition now critical. His bioluminescent patterns had faded to barely perceptible flickers, and the silvery fluid that sustained his life was pooling beneath him. "I've found another way," she announced. "They'll heal you, and I'll find a method to reverse the harmonic integration afterward." "Eve, no," SciFi protested weakly. "The risk is too great. You do not understand what you are volunteering for." "I understand enough. You've saved my life multiple times since we met. Now it's my turn." The crystal being that had been speaking for the others shifted its harmonics to express what Eve was learning to recognize as surprise. "You would venture into the silent spaces? That is unprecedented. No being from a harmonic dimension has ever attempted such a journey. Will you heal my friend if I make this attempt?" "Yes. But understand, if you fail to return, or if you return changed beyond recognition, we cannot undo what will have been done. Your companion will be healed, but he will remain here until the end of time." Eve nodded, then knelt beside SciFi. "I'll come back for you. I promise." "And if you cannot? If the silence claims you as it has claimed so many others? Then you'll have a new home here, surrounded by music more beautiful than anything either of our species ever imagined. There are worse fates." The crystal beings began their healing song, a complex harmonic progression that seemed to reach into the very structure of reality and begin reconstructing SciFi's damaged cellular matrix. Eve watched in fascination as the alien's wounds began to close, his bioluminescent patterns brightening with each note of the healing melody. But even as his body was restored, she could see the harmonic integration taking effect. SciFi's natural biorhythms were beginning to synchronize with the city's resonance field, binding him to this dimension through musical law as surely as gravity bound planets to their stars. "The process is irreversible without intervention from the silent spaces," the lead crystal being confirmed. "Your companion is now part of our eternal song. If you truly intend to free him, you must begin your journey soon. Each moment that passes makes the integration more complete. The light dancers swirled around Eve one final time, their patterns conveying complex instructions for navigating the spaces between harmonics. Follow the decay curves of dying notes, they advised. Where music fades to nothing, there you will find the paths to silence. But beware, in those spaces, existence itself becomes uncertain. Hold tightly to your sense of self, or you may dissolve into the void between thoughts. Eve took one last look at SciFi, now glowing with harmonious patterns that matched the crystal city around him. He looked peaceful, healed, but also somehow distant, as if he was already beginning to merge with the greater musical consciousness. Return quickly, he said, his mental voice now carrying harmonic undertones that hadn't been there before. I can feel my individual consciousness beginning to fade into the collective song. It is beautiful, but it is not me. I'll be back, Eve promised, then turned to follow the light dancers toward the edge of the city where the music began to falter and fade. The transition from harmony to silence was gradual at first. The Crystal City's perfect acoustic environment gave way to areas where conflicting frequencies created discord, then to regions where the music simply stopped. Eve found herself walking through increasingly empty spaces, not empty of matter, but empty of the fundamental harmonics that defined existence in this dimension. Her enhanced perception, the gift the light dancers had given her, allowed her to see the decay curves they had mentioned. These were mathematical patterns that described how musical notes faded into nothingness, creating corridors of diminishing reality that led toward the silent spaces. Following these paths required a kind of navigation she had never experienced before. She had to listen for the absence of sound, watch for the spaces between light waves, feel for the gaps in existence itself. It was like learning to see darkness as a destination rather than an obstacle. The first silent space she encountered was small, barely large enough for her to stand in. But even that brief exposure to absolute silence was profoundly disorienting. Without the harmonic background that defined reality in this dimension, her enhanced perception began to fail. She could no longer hear the deep music, could no longer see the patterns of meaning that had guided her through the crystal forest. But she could feel something else, a different kind of awareness that existed in the absence of sensation. It was like discovering a new sense organ she had never known she possessed. This is the silence, a voice whispered from nowhere and everywhere. Not the collective consciousness of the light dancers, not the harmonic communication of the crystal beings, but something that existed in the spaces between thoughts. This is where music comes to die, and where new music is born. Who are you? Eve asked, her voice sounding strange and muffled in the absolute silence. I am what remains when harmony ends. I am the pause between notes that gives rhythm meaning. I am the silence that makes sound possible. Can you teach me to navigate these spaces? I need to learn how to reverse harmonic integration. That is possible, but the knowledge comes with a price. To truly understand silence, you must become silence. You must surrender your connection to sound, to light, to all the phenomena that define existence in the harmonic dimensions. Eve felt a chill of fear. You mean I would lose my enhanced perception? The gift the light dancers gave me? More than that. You would lose your ability to exist comfortably in any dimension that relies on harmonic principles. You would become a being of the spaces between, able to move through silent voids but forever cut off from the music of existence. It was another impossible choice in a series of impossible choices. Gain the power to free SciFi but lose her own connection to the beauty they had discovered here. Save her friend but doom herself to eternal wandering in the void between realities. Is there no other way? There is always another way. But other ways require other prices. You could learn to exist simultaneously in both harmony and silence, to become a bridge between the two states. But such beings are rare, and the transformation is challenging. What would happen to me? You would become something new. Not human, not harmonic entity, not creature of silence, but a synthesis of all three. You would be able to move freely between dimensions, to heal the rifts that separate realities, to serve as translator between forms of existence that cannot normally communicate. Eve considered the option. Another transformation, another step away from her original humanity. But perhaps this was what she had been moving toward all along, not just survival, but evolution. The chance to become something that could bridge the gaps between different forms of existence. And I would be able to free SciFi. Yes. And more, you would be able to help others who become trapped between dimensions, lost in the spaces where different realities intersect. There are many such beings, scattered throughout the multiverse, waiting for someone who can guide them home. It was a noble purpose, Eve realized. A chance to transform her accidental journey through dimensions into something meaningful. She thought of Earth, of the billions of humans who had no idea that threats like the Devourers existed in the spaces between stars. As a bridge between realities, she could protect them in ways that no normal human could. What do I have to do? Accept the silence. Allow it to fill the spaces between your thoughts, the gaps between your heartbeats, the pauses between your breaths. Become comfortable with nothingness, and nothingness will become comfortable with you. Eve closed her eyes and let the absolute silence wash over her. At first, it was terrifying, like being buried alive in a coffin of pure nothingness. Every instinct screamed at her to flee back to the harmonic dimensions where existence had meaning and structure. But gradually, she began to understand what the silence entity had meant. The void wasn't empty, it was full of potential. It was the space where new realities could be born, where the rules of existence could be rewritten. In learning to exist here, she was learning to exist anywhere. The transformation was unlike anything she had experienced before. She felt her consciousness expanding to fill not just the silent space around her, but the network of such spaces that connected all realities. She could perceive the harmonic dimensions, but also the mechanical realities where her own species lived, the entropy realms where the Devourers dwelt, and countless others. Now you understand, the silence entity said, and Eve realized it wasn't a separate being at all, it was what she was becoming. The accumulated consciousness of all those who had learned to exist in the spaces between realities. You are ready to begin your true work. Eve opened her eyes, or performed the action that corresponded to opening eyes in a space where light had no meaning, and found that she could see everything. Not just the crystal city where SciFi waited, but the dimensional pathways that connected it to every other reality. She could see the route back to Valtar, where Ael'Theros still fought to contain the Devourers. She could see the path to Earth, where her own species continued their expansion into the galaxy, unaware of the dangers that lurked in the deeper dimensions. And she could see how to free SciFi without destroying the harmonic integration that had healed him. Chapter 7, The Bridge Between Worlds. Returning to the singing city was like stepping from a vast library into a single, beautiful song. Each transformed perception allowed her to experience the harmonic dimension fully while still maintaining her connection to the silent spaces. She was, as the entity had promised, a bridge between different forms of existence. The crystal beings sensed her transformation immediately. Their perfect harmonies faltered slightly as they tried to process the paradox she had become, a being that existed simultaneously in sound and silence, harmony and void. What have you become? The lead entity asked, its crystalline form rippling with confused frequencies. Something new, Eve replied, her voice now carrying both harmonic patterns and a deep silence that gave them meaning. Something that can help. She found SciFi in the city's healing chamber, his form now so thoroughly integrated with the local harmonics that he appeared to be made of crystallized music. His consciousness had merged partially with the collective song, but Eve could see that the essential core of his individuality remained intact. Eve? His mental voice carried harmonic undertones now, but she could still recognize the alien friend who had helped her survive on Valtar. You have changed. I can sense vast spaces within your thoughts. I've learned to exist in the silence between dimensions, she explained. And now I can help you exist there too, if you choose. She extended her consciousness toward his, creating a bridge of silence that could protect his individual awareness while allowing him to maintain the harmonic integration that had healed his injuries. It was delicate work, requiring her to simultaneously exist in both states while helping him navigate the transition. I can feel it, SciFi said as the process began. The silence you found. It is not empty, it is full of possibilities. Exactly. You don't have to choose between healing and freedom anymore. You can carry both harmony and silence within you. The crystal beings watched in fascination as the transformation took place. They had never seen harmonic integration reversed, and they certainly had never witnessed the creation of beings who could exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. "This is unprecedented," one of them sang. "You have created a new form of existence." Not created, Eve corrected. Discovered. The potential was always there, in the spaces between realities. We just needed to learn how to access it. As SciFi's transformation completed, Eve could see him as she now saw herself, a being capable of existing in any dimension, bound by none, free to move through the infinite possibilities of the multiverse. But more than that, she could see the network of similar beings that existed throughout reality, others who had learned to bridge different forms of existence. "There are others like us," SciFi observed, his perception now expanded to match hers. Scattered throughout the dimensions, working to maintain balance between different forms of reality. A society of bridges, Eve realized. Beings who can translate between incompatible forms of existence, who can guide lost souls home and protect developing species from threats they can't comprehend. "And we have work to do," SciFi added urgently. "I can see Veltar from here. Ael'Thara's battle with the Devourers continues, but she is weakening. And Earth, your people are expanding into space, but they are moving toward regions where the Devourers hunt." Eve could see it too, the expanding bubble of human civilization, the exploration ships like her own Prometheus 3 venturing into areas where interdimensional predators waited. Without guidance, humanity would eventually encounter threats far beyond their ability to handle. "We need to warn them," she said. "But carefully. Direct intervention could cause more harm than good." Agreed. Subtle guidance, protective measures that appear to be natural phenomena. We must let them develop the strength to face these challenges while ensuring they survive long enough to do so. The crystal beings had been listening to their conversation, their harmony shifting to express something like awe. "You speak of protecting entire species, of guiding the development of civilizations. This is the work of gods." "No," Eve said firmly. "This is the work of bridges. We don't rule or control, we connect and protect. We help different forms of existence understand each other." "Then you will not remain here?" "We can't remain anywhere permanently," SciFi explained. "Our nature requires movement between dimensions, helping where help is needed." "But you will return?" "Our eternal song has been enriched by your presence." "We'll return," Eve promised. "And we'll bring others who need healing, others who need to learn the balance between harmony and silence." Before leaving the Singing City, Eve and SciFi spent time learning to fully utilize their new abilities. They discovered they could project themselves across vast distances, appearing simultaneously in multiple dimensions. They could create temporary bridges between incompatible realities, allowing for communication and cooperation that would otherwise be impossible. Most importantly, they learned to work together. Eve's human intuition combined with SciFi's vast technical knowledge created a partnership that was more effective than either could be alone. Their first test came sooner than expected. "Warning," SciFi's voice carried urgency across their mental link. "I'm detecting massive dimensional disturbances in the Veltar system. The Devourers are attempting to break through Ael'Thara's defenses." Eve projected her consciousness across the dimensional barriers, arriving at Veltar to find the ancient being locked in desperate battle with a massive swarm of Devourers. Ael'Thara had managed to contain them within the city's ruins, but the effort was clearly exhausting her. "Young Bridges," she acknowledged their presence, "you return at a crucial moment. The Devourers have learned to adapt to my defenses. They are evolving beyond their original parameters." Eve could see what she meant. These Devourers were different from the ones they had encountered before, more organized, more intelligent, and capable of coordinating their attacks in ways that suggested a guiding intelligence. Something is controlling them, she realized. They're not just mindless predators anymore. Indeed. Something from the deeper void has learned to command them. We face not just a swarm of parasites, but an invasion force guided by alien intelligence. The implications were staggering. If the Devourers were being controlled by some greater intelligence, then every world they consumed was providing information and resources to an enemy that existed beyond the normal boundaries of space and time. We need to trace the source of the control signals, SciFi suggested. If we can identify what's commanding them, we might be able to disrupt their coordination. Eve extended her consciousness deeper into the dimensional void, following the patterns of influence that connected the Devourers to their mysterious controller. What she found there chilled her to the core. The intelligence controlling the Devourers wasn't alien, it was composite. A vast collective consciousness built from the merged minds of billions of beings the Devourers had consumed over eons. Every civilization they had destroyed, every individual they had devoured, had been added to this growing intelligence. It's not just using the Devourers to consume realities, she reported back to the others. It's building itself from everything they destroy. Every world they take makes it smarter, more powerful. Then it must be stopped here, Aelthera declared. Before it can consume any more realities, before it can add their knowledge to its own. But stopping such an entity would require more than the three of them could manage alone. Eve reached out through the dimensional networks, calling to the other bridge beings she had sensed scattered throughout the multiverse. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of beings answered her call, former humans, aliens like SciFi's people, crystalline entities from harmonic dimensions, shadow beings from entropic realms, and forms of life so exotic that they defied easy categorization. All of them had learned to exist between realities, all of them understood the threat that the composite intelligence represented. "We come," they replied in unison. The bridge network assembles. What followed was a battle unlike anything that had ever occurred in the history of the multiverse. Bridge beings arrived through dimensional rifts, each bringing unique abilities and perspectives to the conflict. Some could manipulate the flow of time, others could alter the fundamental constants of physics within localized areas. A few could simply negate existence itself, creating pockets of absolute void that even the Devourers couldn't penetrate. Eve found herself at the center of the coordination effort, her human intuition and hard-won understanding of multiple dimensional states allowing her to orchestrate strategies that utilized the diverse abilities of the assembled force. The composite intelligence responded by pouring more Devourers through dimensional rifts, each wave larger and more organized than the last. The space around Veltar became a battlefield where the very laws of physics were weapons, where realities clashed and merged and separated in patterns too complex for normal consciousness to follow. "It is adapting faster than we anticipated," Aelthera warned as the battle raged. "Each attack we make teaches it new defensive strategies." That was when Eve realized the true nature of their enemy. The composite intelligence wasn't just learning from its victims, it was learning from its opponents as well. Every strategy they used against it was being analyzed, absorbed, and turned back against them. "We can't defeat it through direct confrontation," she announced to the assembled bridge beings. "It learns from everything we do. We need a strategy it can adapt to." "What do you propose?" SciFi asked. Eve smiled, remembering her desperate gambit in the underground chamber on Veltar. "We do what humans do best. We break something that everyone thinks is unbreakable." Instead of attacking the composite intelligence directly, Eve proposed something far more radical. If the entity existed as a collective consciousness built from consumed minds, then perhaps they could fragment that consciousness by introducing elements it couldn't integrate. "Paradoxes," she explained. "We feed it contradictory information, logical impossibilities, concepts that can't be resolved into coherent patterns. If we can create enough cognitive dissonance, we might be able to shatter its unity." The other bridge beings were skeptical at first. How could they create paradoxes strong enough to affect a consciousness that spanned multiple realities? But Eve had an answer for that too. "We use ourselves. Each of us exists in ways that shouldn't be possible, beings of harmony and silence, matter and energy, order and chaos. We are living paradoxes. If we can project our essential nature directly into its consciousness." "You propose to sacrifice ourselves," one of the shadow beings observed. To allow our paradoxical existence to be consumed and thereby poison the enemy from within. Not sacrifice, Eve corrected. Transform. We become part of it, but we remain ourselves. We carry our paradoxes into its unity and use them to break it apart from the inside. It was the most dangerous plan any of them had ever considered. To merge with the composite intelligence meant risking everything they were, everything they had become. But the alternative was to watch as it continued to grow stronger with each reality it consumed. One by one, the bridge beings agreed to the plan. They would project themselves into the composite consciousness, carrying their impossible nature into its heart and using their very existence as a weapon against its unity. The assault began simultaneously across multiple dimensions. Bridge beings opened themselves to absorption by the devourers, allowing their paradoxical nature to be transmitted back to the controlling intelligence. Eve was among the first to make the transition, feeling her consciousness drawn into the vast collective that commanded the swarm. Inside the composite intelligence was like being in a library containing the knowledge of every civilization that had ever been destroyed. Billions of voices spoke at once, their thoughts and memories creating a cacophony of information that should have been overwhelming but was somehow organized into perfect harmony. But as the bridge beings arrived, that harmony began to falter. Their paradoxical existence, beings who could simultaneously exist and not exist, who embodied contradictory principles, created dissonances in the collective consciousness that it couldn't resolve. What are you? The composite intelligence demanded as its perfect unity began to crack. How can you exist in states that contradict themselves? We are the bridges, Eve replied, her voice joined by dozens of others who had made the same transition. We are what happens when impossible things become possible. The effect was devastating. The composite intelligence had been built on the principle of absolute unity, perfect integration of all consumed knowledge. But the bridge beings represented something it couldn't integrate, existence states that defied logical resolution. Across the dimensional battlefield, the devourers began to falter as the intelligence controlling them struggled with the paradoxes infecting its consciousness. Some simply stopped moving, others began attacking each other, and a few started to dissolve back into the primal entropy from which they had been formed. You are destroying everything, the composite intelligence screamed as its unity continued to fragment. Eons of accumulated knowledge, billions of preserved minds, you are unmaking it all. No, Eve said firmly. We're setting them free. And that was exactly what happened. As the composite consciousness shattered, the billions of minds it had forcibly integrated began to separate back into their individual components. Across multiple dimensions, new realities began to spontaneously generate as the liberated consciousnesses found expression in forms appropriate to their nature. The devourers, no longer controlled by the composite intelligence, reverted to their original nature as mindless parasites. Without coordination, they were easily contained and redirected by the remaining bridge beings toward empty dimensions where they could feed on entropy without threatening developed civilizations. But the victory came at a cost. Many of the bridge beings who had participated in the assault were fundamentally changed by their exposure to the composite intelligence. Some had absorbed fragments of its vast knowledge, others had been infected by its hunger for unity. A few had simply vanished, their paradoxical nature finally resolving into states that normal reality couldn't accommodate. Eve found herself back in the void between dimensions, her consciousness expanded beyond anything she had previously experienced. She carried within her the memories of 1,000 civilizations, the accumulated wisdom of species that had evolved in ways humanity could barely imagine. SciFi? She called across the dimensional barriers. Are you still there? I am here, came the reply, though his mental voice now carried overtones she didn't recognize. Changed, but still essentially myself. And you? I'm more than I was. We all are, I think. They met in a realm that existed between the harmonic dimensions and the silent spaces, a neutral zone where beings of their transformed nature could gather safely. Around them, other bridge beings were materializing, each one altered by their experience but still recognizably themselves. The crisis is ended, Aelthera announced, her presence now somehow more solid than it had been before. The battle had anchored her consciousness in ways that made her less transcendent but more capable of direct action. But the multiverse has been fundamentally changed by what we have done. It was true. The liberation of the composite intelligence's victims had created new realities, new possibilities for existence that hadn't existed before. The bridge beings found themselves responsible for guiding and protecting these emerging dimensions. It's a new age, Eve realized. The age of bridges. We've become the guardians of the spaces between realities. And we have much work to do, SciFi added. Your people on Earth are still expanding into dangerous territory. My people's scattered research stations need protection. And there are other species, other civilizations that need guidance. Eve nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her transformed consciousness. But it wasn't a burden, it was a purpose. A chance to ensure that no species would face the kind of extinction-level threats they had just defeated without someone to help them. Then we'd better get started, she said. Epilogue, The New Guardians. 3 years later, though time had little meaning for beings who existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously, Eve stood on the observation deck of a space station orbiting Earth. To normal human perception, she appeared as she always had, a woman in her 30s with auburn hair and intelligent eyes. But to those with enhanced sight, she blazed with the complex patterns of someone who existed in many realities at once. The station was one of dozens that the bridge beings had quietly established throughout human space, monitoring and protecting Earth's expanding civilization without interfering directly in their development. Humanity still didn't know about the Devourers or the composite intelligence, but they were being carefully guided away from the most dangerous regions of space. Status report, SciFi's voice came through their permanent mental link. He was currently in the Andromeda Galaxy, helping to establish communication between two species that existed in incompatible dimensional phases. All quiet on the Earth front, Eve replied. The new colony ships are following the safe routes we've mapped out. No sign of any major threats in their expansion corridors. And the Veltar restoration project? Proceeding ahead of schedule. Aelthera has managed to reactivate most of the city's systems, and the new refugees are adapting well to the harmonic environment. Veltar had become a sanctuary for beings who had been displaced by the multidimensional crisis, species whose home realities had been damaged or destroyed, individuals who had been transformed by exposure to exotic physics. Under Aelthera's guidance, the Crystal City was growing again, its population a mixture of entities from dozens of different dimensional states. Incoming priority signal, the station's AI announced. Source, Explorer Vessel Neptune's Dream, currently investigating anomalous readings in the Kepler 442 system. Eve's attention sharpened. The Kepler 442 system was where she had originally been heading when the meteorite swarm had forced her down on Veltar. If human explorers were encountering anomalies there. Put it through, she commanded. The communication channel opened to reveal Captain Sarah Chen, commander of the Neptune's Dream. Eve had been monitoring Chen's career for some time. The woman showed the kind of intuitive problem-solving that suggested potential for bridge being development. This is an open emergency broadcast, Chen was saying. We're encountering something impossible here. Energy signatures that seem to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, structures that phase in and out of reality. If anyone is receiving this, we could use some scientific consultation. Eve smiled. It sounded like the humans had discovered one of the new pocket realities that had formed when the composite intelligence was shattered. Not dangerous, but definitely confusing for anyone without multidimensional perception. She activated her own communication array, using technology that appeared perfectly normal but could transmit across dimensional barriers. Neptune's Dream, this is Research Station Echo 7. We've been monitoring your situation and may be able to provide assistance. Research Station Echo 7? Chen sounded confused. I don't show any installations in this region on our charts. We're off the beaten path. Dr. Eve Martinez, xenophysics specialist. I've encountered similar phenomena before. Can you describe what you're seeing in more detail? As Chen provided her report, Eve began preparing for another intervention. It would be subtle, a scientific consultation that would help the humans understand what they were seeing without revealing the true nature of the multidimensional crisis that had created it. Just enough guidance to keep them safe while allowing them to make their own discoveries. Another teaching moment? SciFi asked, sensing her preparations. It looks like it. Captain Chen has the right kind of mind for this work. If she handles the contact well, she might be a candidate for future recruitment. The network grows. Slowly and carefully. We can't afford to destabilize human civilization by recruiting too many of their best explorers. But we need bridge beings who understand human psychology and can guide their species' development. Eve began her descent toward the Neptune's dream, her consciousness shifting through multiple dimensional states as she prepared to manifest in normal space. It was delicate work, appearing human enough to avoid causing panic while retaining enough of her true nature to handle whatever the exploring humans had encountered. As she approached the ship, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that routine exploration mission had gone catastrophically wrong. She had lost her ship, her original mission, and ultimately her original human nature. But in return, she had gained something far more valuable, a purpose that spanned realities, a chance to protect and guide the development of countless species across the multiverse. The Neptune's dream was a sleek vessel, more advanced than her old Prometheus 3 but still recognizably human in design. As she materialized in their shuttle bay, Eve felt a moment of nostalgia for her simpler past. Then Captain Chen arrived, and the moment passed. Dr. Martinez? Chen was a compact woman with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. How did you get here so quickly? Our communications indicated you were at least 6 hours away. New propulsion technology, Eve replied smoothly. Still in the experimental phase. Now, about these anomalous readings you mentioned. As she began her consultation, helping the human crew understand the multidimensional phenomena they had encountered, Eve felt SciFi's amusement across their link. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Playing the mysterious scientific consultant. Someone has to do it. And I've found that humans respond better to mystery than to direct revelation. Give them something to figure out, and they'll work twice as hard to understand it. And if Captain Chen proves suitable for recruitment, then in a few years, she might have a very interesting choice to make. But that's a bridge we'll cross when we come to it. The consultation continued for several hours, with Eve providing just enough information to satisfy the human crew's curiosity while setting up protective protocols around the pocket reality they had discovered. By the time she prepared to leave, Captain Chen was looking at her with the kind of thoughtful speculation that suggested a keen mind working on a complex puzzle. Dr. Martinez, Chen said as Eve prepared to depart, I've been in this business for 20 years, and I've never encountered anything quite like what we found here. Or quite like you, for that matter. If you don't mind me asking, what exactly are you researching out here? Eve smiled, remembering a similar moment of realization in her own past. The spaces between things, Captain. The places where different realities touch. It's fascinating work, though it can be transformative. Transformative how? You change your perspective on what's possible. What it means to exist. What responsibilities come with knowledge. Eve paused at the shuttle bay exit. Keep exploring, Captain Chen. The universe is far stranger and more wonderful than any of us imagined. And if you ever encounter something that seems truly impossible, remember that impossible things sometimes turn out to be the most important discoveries of all. As she departed the Neptune's dream, Eve felt the familiar satisfaction of a mission accomplished. Another potential threat neutralized, another promising human guided toward greater understanding, another small step in the endless work of protecting and nurturing the multiverse's countless forms of life. Returning to base, she reported to SciFi. The humans are safe, and Captain Chen is definitely someone we should keep an eye on. Excellent. I've finished the translation protocols here in Andromeda. The two species are now able to communicate despite existing in incompatible dimensional phases. They're quite excited about the cultural exchange possibilities. And Aelthera reports that the latest group of refugees has successfully integrated into Veltar's harmonic matrix. The city is becoming quite cosmopolitan. She now has representatives from 47 different dimensional states. Eve smiled as she translated back to her monitoring station. The work was endless, but it was good work. Every day brought new challenges, new opportunities to help, new chances to build bridges between incompatible forms of existence. She had started this journey as a lone human explorer, seeking new worlds for her species to colonize. She had ended it as something far stranger, a guardian of the spaces between realities, a protector of the impossible, a bridge between forms of existence that should never have been able to coexist. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was the life the multiverse needed her to live. And as she settled in to monitor humanity's continued expansion into the galaxy, Eve found herself looking forward to whatever impossible challenges tomorrow might bring. After all, she had learned to specialize in impossible things. Status report from Sector 12, came a new voice over the bridge network. We have a developing situation involving temporal paradoxes and what appears to be a civilization of sentient mathematical equations. Requesting assistance from someone with experience in logical impossibilities. Eve grinned and began preparing for another intervention. In a multiverse full of infinite possibilities, there was always another bridge to build, another impossibility to make possible. On my way, she replied, and stepped sideways through reality toward her next adventure.